Alex Calloway was a mammoth that commanded respect in every business circle. He entered his reputation as a successful millionaire CEO was built on years of hard work, calculated risk, and an unyielding commitment to excellence. He had made his fortune by building a business empire from scratch, turning his company into one of the most powerful and influential in the industry. To the outside world, Alex was everything they aspired to be: wealthy, influential, and admired. His office, located on the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper, offered a panoramic view of the city, a fitting symbol of the heights he had reached. Alex was the kind of man who never showed weakness, never let personal matters interfere with his professional goals. Every decision he made was precise, every move carefully calculated. He was the master of his domain, controlling his world with an iron grip. His persona was cold, business-minded, and impenetrable. To everyone around him, Alex was the definition of success, but few knew the cost of that success. Few knew the sacrifice he had made, or the lone lines that came with being at the top. His reputation was built on ruthless efficiency and the way he could turn any situation into a profitable outcome. He was a man who thrived on challenge, always striving for more, never satisfied with the status quo. His office was a reflection of his mindset, sleek, modern, and minimalist. There was no room for distractions, no space for anything that didn't serve the purpose of advancing his business. In his world, there was no room for personal attachments, no time for relationships. Alex's life was defined by one thing: his work, but there was one person who had always been by his side: Sophia Williams, his personal secretary. Sophia had worked for Alex since the early days of his career, and she knew him better than anyone else. Over the years, she had earned his trust, becoming indispensable to his daily routine. She managed his calendar, arranged his meetings, and ensured that everything in his life ran smoothly. In many ways, Sophia was the glue that held his world together, and she did it all without ever complaining, without ever seeking anything in return. To the outside world, Sophia was just another employee, efficient, competent, and professional. But there was something that knew something she had hidden deep inside for years. Sophia was in love with Alex. She had been since the first time she laid eyes on him, but she knew better than to act on those feelings. She had spent years keeping her emotions in check, suppressing any desire to cross the professional boundary that defined their relationship. It was a boundary that Sophia respected, but one that made her heart ache with longing every day. She watched him from the sidelines, admired his brilliance from a distance, and helped him achieve his goals without ever asking for anything in return. Alex was the center of her world event, though she knew he would never see her in the same light. He was too focused on his work, too consumed by his ambition to notice the quiet woman who stood by him day after day, managing the chaos of his life. Today, however, was different. The air between them was thick with tension, a sense of anticipation hanging in the office as they prepared for the most important meeting of the year. The deal they were about to finalize would secure the company's future for years to come. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and Alex knew it. He was determined to close this deal to prove once again that he was the best in the business. Sophia, as always, was at his side, ensuring that everything was in place for the meeting. She had spent days preparing for this moment, arranging the logistics, organizing the documents, and ensuring that Alex had everything he needed to make a lasting impression. She had always been good at her job, but today the pressure was different. She knew how much this deal meant to Alex, and she couldn't afford to make a mistake. As she moved around the office, putting the final touches on the presentation, she couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. Alex was quieter than usual, his focus razor-sharp as he reviewed the contract. She could see the strain in his shoulders, the way he clenched his jaw as he scanned the papers. It was rare to see him like this, vulnerable, on edge. Alex Calloway was never uncertain, never off balance. But today he seemed human. She had always known that behind his confident exterior was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. The pressure of maintaining his success, of constantly being the best, must have been exhausting. But Sophia never dared to ask him about it. She knew better than to pry into his personal life. She was just his secretary after all. Everything ready for the meeting? Alex's voice broke through her thoughts, and she looked up to find him watching her, his eyes sharp and calculating. He was always focused, always present in the moment, but today there was something else in his gaze, something that made her heart race. She quickly composed herself, hiding any trace of emotion behind a professional mask. "Everything's in order," Sophia replied, her voice steady. She handed him the final set of documents, and their fingers brushed briefly. The contact was so fleeting, so innocent, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her body. She quickly pulled her hand back, trying to steady her breath. She had to focus. This wasn't the time for distractions. Alex took the documents without a word, his eyes scanning them quickly before meeting her gaze once again. "Good," he said. His voice clipped. "This is it, Sophia. This deal will determine the next phase of the company. We need to get this right." Sophia nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and admiration. She had always believed in Alex and his ability to make things happen, to turn the impossible into reality. She had spent years supporting him, watching him rise higher and higher, and today she was proud to be by his side once again. But there was something else inside her, something that had been growing for years, something she could no longer ignore. As they prepared for the meeting, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that today would change everything. She didn't know why she felt that way, but deep down she knew that whatever happened today, nothing would be the same again. Alex was ready. He had always been ready. But what about her? The day had been long and exhausting. Hours of tense negotiations, endless rounds of back and forth, and the weight of sealing the most important deal of the year. Alex Calloway had been at the top of his game as always, calm, collected, and calculating with every move he made. But the pressure had worn on him. His mind was spinning, his body tired, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the deep fatigue that came with constantly being the best, the most driven, and the most feared. The celebratory party, which had been organized to mark the success of the deal, seemed like a welcome escape, a brief respite from the constant grind. Alex had never been one for lavish celebrations, but tonight was different. He was surrounded by colleagues, business partners, and friends, all raising glasses in his honor. But the cheers, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all felt hollow to him. For a man who had everything, there was still something missing. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was a gnawing emptiness inside of him that he could never quite shake. Sophia stood beside him as she always did. She was the calm in his storm, the one person he could rely on to handle everything with quiet efficiency. She had arranged the event, ensured the guests were happy, and kept everything running smoothly just as she always did. But tonight, there was a difference in the way she moved, the way she held herself. There was something about her that made Alex notice her more than he ever had before. The way her hair caught the light, the way her eyes sparkled with a hint of excitement that he had never seen in her before. It was strange. Alex had always known Sophia. She was the competent, no-nonsense woman who made his life easier. But tonight, for some reason, he couldn't stop noticing the small details. Perhaps it was the atmosphere of the party, or maybe it was the fact that for the first time in a while, he allowed himself to relax. Whatever it was, he found himself drawn to her, in a way he couldn't explain. The drinks flowed freely as the night wore on. Alex allowed himself to indulge in more than he normally would, and before long, the sharp edge of his usual self-control began to dull. He laughed more than he ever had at these kinds of events, engaging with colleagues he barely knew, letting his guard down just a little bit. He was used to being in charge, used to being the center of attention, but tonight he felt different. His world felt softer, more forgiving, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to just be. Sophia too had loosened up a bit. Normally she was always the professional, the one who kept things in check. But tonight, with the pressure of the deal finally behind them, she found herself letting go. She sipped her drink more slowly than she intended, the warmth spreading through her veins, and she caught herself laughing at things she normally wouldn't. It wasn't like Sophia to abandon her sense of control, but tonight she felt something else, something that made her forget her usual caution. She was with Alex after all, the man who had always been just a step ahead of her, who she had always admired from afar. Tonight, however, he was just Alex, not the CEO, not the boss, just a man caught up in the moment. The night carried on and the hours seemed to blur together. Before long, the party was winding down and the guests began to filter out one by one. Alex had already had more than his fair share of drinks, but he wasn't quite ready to go back to his hotel room. He knew Sophia was equally exhausted, though she never let it show. As the last few guests left, Alex leaned toward her, his voice a little slower than usual. "Sophia? I think I need some air," he said, his words slurring just slightly. Sophia smiled softly, always the professional, even now. "I'll walk you back to your room," she offered, her voice steady. But as they exited the venue, the cool night air hit them both, and Alex felt a sense of relief. The weight of the day, the pressure of the business deal seemed to fade in the chill of the night. They walked together in silence, the only sound the faint echo of their footsteps on the pavement. As they reached their hotel, Alex was still half in a haze, the alcohol clouding his mind. He wasn't quite sure what had come over him, but he found himself wishing the night didn't have to end. He had been so focused on his work for so long, and now with everything settled, he didn't know how to deal with the emptiness that seemed to creep in when the adrenaline wore off. Without thinking, he took a step toward Sophia. She stood still, the gentle breeze tugging at the strands of her hair. There was something in the air, something unspoken between them. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though the world had shifted, and they were the only two people left in it. "Sophia," Alex said softly, his voice tinged with an unfamiliar vulnerability, "I don't want the night to end." She hesitated, her heart pounding. She had never seen Alex like this, lost, uncertain, unsure. But she knew better than to overthink it. She had spent years keeping her emotions in check, keeping everything locked away. But tonight, everything felt different. "I don't either," she replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Before either of them could say another word, Alex took a step forward, his hand reaching out to touch hers. The connection between them was electric, charged with something neither of them could deny. It was a moment of vulnerability. Two people who had spent years in each other's presence, but never quite truly seeing each other. They walked into the hotel, and the world around them seemed to fade away. They had shared a connection, however brief, earlier, but now it was more than that. Alex, in a drunken haze, made his way toward the wrong room, stumbling a little as he tried to unlock the door. Sophia, too tipsy to notice the difference, followed him, her pulse quickening as she felt his presence so close to hers. Inside the room, the door closed behind them. In their state of vulnerability, the lines between what was professional and what was personal blurred. What happened next was something neither of them could have anticipated. In a moment of weakness, of overwhelming emotion and longing, the two gave in to the unexpected pull between them. What followed was a night of intimacy, a mistake that neither of them would ever forget. Neither Alex nor Sophia knew how to process what had just happened. The next morning, Alex woke up in a haze, the memories of the night slowly creeping back into his mind. The regret hit him like a wave. He had crossed a line he could never uncross, and in doing so had complicated everything. Sophia too awoke with a sense of disbelief. What had they done? And why did she feel as though her heart was now tangled in a way she couldn't untangle? It was a night that neither would forget, a moment of vulnerability, a mistake that would change the course of both their lives forever. Alex woke with a groggy start, the sunlight creeping in through the heavy curtains. His head was pounding a dull throb behind his eyes, and his body felt like it had been run over by a truck. It took a moment for him to fully come to his senses, and when he did, he realized something that made his stomach churn. A deep sense of confusion and guilt. He was in Sophia's room. The room felt unfamiliar, but there was no mistaking the soft sheets beneath him or the faint scent of lavender in the air. He looked around, trying to piece together how he had ended up here. His mind was foggy, like trying to look through a haze of smoke. He couldn't remember much of the night, but what little he could recall made his chest tighten. There was a fragmented memory of the party, the drinks, the laughing. But then there was the darkness, the blur, the warmth of Sophia's presence. And then it all came crashing back, his hand on her skin, the kiss, the intimate moments that followed. Panic began to rise in him like a tidal wave. What had he done? He had crossed a line that he should have never crossed. His heart raced, and he instinctively turned to look at Sophia, who lay in the bed next to him, her back turned toward him. She was facing the wall, still asleep, or at least pretending to be. But there was an energy in the room, a silence that spoke louder than any words could. Sophia wasn't moving, and the stillness between them felt suffocating. His gaze flickered to her back, and a pang of guilt shot through him. How could he have let this happen? How could he have been so reckless, so out of control? He sat up slowly, clutching his head with one hand, trying to steady himself. The room spun for a moment, and he leaned over to steady himself against the nightstand. He tried to recall the night, the details coming in fragments, but there was one thing he couldn't escape, the sense that what they had shared wasn't just a mistake for him. It was a mistake for Sophia too. He turned back to look at her again. Her hair was mussed, her face partially buried in the pillow. She had always been the composed one, the professional. But now in the stillness of the morning, Alex couldn't help but wonder, had she regretted it too? Finally, Sophia stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a split second, their gazes locked. There was no warmth in her expression, no sign of the understanding they had always shared. Instead, there was a coldness, an uncomfortable distance. It was as if she was trying to avoid him, trying to shut him out completely. Sophia blinked, her eyes a little red-rimmed, as if she had been awake for some time but had been avoiding looking at him. She didn't say anything. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement of what had happened between them the night before. It was as though she was still processing it all, trying to make sense of the chaos just as he was. Alex felt a tightness in his chest, something heavy that he couldn't shake off. He knew that what had happened couldn't be erased, but he needed to fix it to make it right. At least he needed to try. He shifted uncomfortably on the edge of the bed, his heart beating faster. "Sophia," he said, his voice hoarse, filled with a mixture of regret and guilt. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I don't know how it happened. I never should have." His words trailed off, unable to express the full weight of what he was feeling. He looked over at her again, hoping for some reaction, any sign that she might still care enough to listen. But Sophia didn't respond right away. She remained silent, her face turned away from him. Her fingers were curled tightly around the edges of the blanket, her knuckles white. She was distant, colder than he had ever seen her. Her silence spoke volumes, and it pierced through him like a blade. The air in the room was thick with tension, as if the words neither of them could say hung in the space between them. Alex could see the way her body was stiff, as if she was holding herself back from something painful. She wasn't looking at him, wasn't meeting his gaze. Instead, she stared at the wall, lost in thought. "Sophia," Alex tried again, his voice quieter now. "Please, talk to me. I need to know that you're okay. What happened last night, it was a mistake, a huge mistake, and I can't just pretend it didn't happen. I never meant to hurt you. I wasn't myself." I don't know what came over me. There was still no response. The silence between them was suffocating. Alex felt his heart pounding faster in his chest, his palms growing sweaty. He had always been a man in control of his emotions, of his thoughts, of everything. But now in this moment, he was unraveling. His usual confidence had completely deserted him, leaving behind a man who was unsure and desperate for forgiveness. Sophia shifted slightly, and for a moment Alex thought she might speak, but instead she simply pulled the blanket up higher around her, curling her body into a protective ball. The message was clear, she was shutting him out. He swallowed hard, trying to hold back the frustration and sadness that threatened to overtake him. But deep down he knew that Sophia's reaction was justified. She had been loyal to him for years. She had always respected the boundaries they had kept between them. And now, in one reckless, foolish moment, he had destroyed that trust. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm so sorry." But Sophia didn't respond. She said nothing, didn't even acknowledge him. Her silence was louder than anything he could have said. He couldn't bear it. He didn't know what else to do, how to fix the mess he had created. He stood up slowly, feeling like a stranger in her room. Every step he took away from the bed felt like a chasm widening between them. He didn't know what to do, how to make things right. And as he walked toward the door, the weight of what he had done hung over him like an unbearable cloud. "Sophia?" He whispered once more, but she still didn't respond. With a heavy heart, Alex walked out of the room, the door closing softly behind him. He knew he couldn't undo the damage he had done. But he also knew that somehow he would have to live with the consequences. And it was clear, Whatever had happened between them, it had changed everything. Days passed in a blur, and Alex couldn't escape the crushing guilt that gnawed at him. Every waking moment was filled with the haunting memory of the night with Sophia, his mistake, his recklessness. It was all he could think about. He had tried to focus on work to bury the guilt beneath his never-ending list of tasks. But no matter how hard he tried, it always found him. The distance between him and Sophia had only grown since that night. She had become a shadow of the woman he once knew, polite, distant, and always just out of reach. They barely spoke beyond the necessary exchanges. She avoided looking him in the eye, and whenever he attempted to apologize, her silence crushed him. The tension in the air was suffocating, and Alex knew he couldn't keep running from it forever. It was on a cold, quiet morning when Sophia finally broke the silence. Alex was in his office, staring blankly at his desk when she walked in. Her expression was unreadable, her face set in a mask of calm. But Alex could sense the shift in the air. Something had changed. "Alex," she said softly, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. "We need to talk." His heart skipped a beat. He stood up immediately, anxiety twisting in his chest. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I know I can't undo what happened, but I..." She held up a hand to stop him, her eyes meeting his, but there was no warmth in them. "I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He staggered backward, his breath catching in his throat. His mind raced, and for a moment he was sure he hadn't heard her correctly. "What?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm pregnant." "Alex," she repeated, her tone calm, almost detached. "And this is my reality now. This is our reality." Alex's world seemed to tilt on its axis. His knees felt weak, and he grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself. "Oh my God, Sophia?" He couldn't finish the sentence. His head was spinning, the guilt intensifying with each passing second. Sophia stood motionless, her face calm, but her hands clenched at her sides. She had already accepted the gravity of the situation, and there was no room for denial in her heart. She had known for a few days now, and the weight of it had settled deep within her. She didn't want to be angry. She didn't want to add more pain to what was already there. But she also knew this wasn't just about her, it was about the child they had created together. "I didn't come here to blame you, Alex," she said, her voice firm yet quiet. "But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This isn't just a mistake anymore. It's real and it's happening. And you have a responsibility. To me. To the baby." Alex's chest tightened. The realization of what had happened, what he had done, hit him harder than anything else. The responsibility he had always avoided, the life he had never expected to be tangled up in, was now a reality. He couldn't escape it. "I didn't mean for this to happen. This wasn't how I saw things going." Sophia nodded slowly, her expression softening just a little, but the pain in her eyes was still there. "I know. But the truth is, it's happened, and we have to deal with it now." She paused, her voice quivering slightly despite her best effort to remain composed. "I can't do this alone, Alex. I need to know if you're going to be there. I need to know if you're going to take responsibility." Alex felt his throat tighten, the weight of his own anger and guilt pressing down on him. His emotions were all tangled up, guilt for what he had done, anger at himself for not controlling his actions, confusion over what to do next. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to be a father. I don't even know if I'm capable of being the person you need me to be." "Neither do I," Sophia replied quietly. "But I don't need you to have all the answers right now. I just need you to be here. I just need you to show up and take responsibility. That's all I need from you." Alex looked at her, his heart heavy with regret and fear. He was a man who had always controlled every aspect of his life, but this was beyond his control. He didn't know how to navigate this new reality, this new responsibility that had been thrust upon him. But one thing was clear, he couldn't run from it. He couldn't hide from the truth anymore. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm so sorry for everything," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't know what the future holds, but I promise you, I will be here. I will do whatever it takes to make things right." Sophia didn't answer right away. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. For the first time in a long while, Alex could see the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes, even if she wasn't sure whether she believed him or not. She didn't have all the answers either, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be okay. As she left the office, Alex sat back down at his desk, his hands trembling. The guilt was still there, lingering like a shadow, but for the first time in days, he felt a spark of determination. He didn't know what would come next, or how they would navigate this new chapter, but he was going to try. For her. For the child. He didn't have all the answers. But he would find a way. The days that followed Sophia's revelation were filled with a heavy silence. Alex tried to focus on work, but it felt pointless. Every decision, every deal he made felt insignificant in comparison to the reality that had settled over him like a storm cloud. He couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. The child that had been conceived that night, his child was now a living, breathing reality. And no matter how hard he tried to distract himself, the thought of it consumed him. He had spent his entire life building an empire, making deals, achieving success. But none of it seemed important anymore. He kept picturing a child, his child, growing up, the life that little one could have, and he wondered if he was ready to give it the love and responsibility it deserved. The guilt continued to gnaw at him, pulling him further into a pit of self-doubt. It wasn't until one evening, when Alex found himself standing in the doorway of Sophia's office, that he finally knew what he had to do. He had tried to avoid her, to ignore the reality of the situation, but it wasn't working. He had to face this. He had to speak to her, apologize in a way that wasn't just words, but actions. He couldn't keep running. "Sophia," he said, his voice softer than usual, tinged with vulnerability. "I need to talk." Sophia looked up from her desk, her eyes wary. There was a slight hesitation in her posture, but she didn't refuse. She nodded and motioned for him to sit. The tension between them was palpable, but this time Alex couldn't stay silent. "I've been thinking a lot," he started, sitting down across from her. "About what you said. About the baby. About us. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I'm not going to walk away from this. I'll take full responsibility for everything. I will do whatever it takes to make this right, to be there for you, for the baby. I can't change the past, but I can change the future." Sophia's eyes softened slightly, but there was no immediate warmth in her expression. She didn't rush to reassure him or offer comfort. Instead, she crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. "Alex's words mean nothing now," she said, her tone steady but firm. "You've said plenty of things to me in the past about how important work is, about how much I mean to the company, but now it's not about that anymore. It's about this child, and it's about you proving that you're worthy of being a father." Alex felt a pang in his chest, but he held her gaze. He knew she was right. His words hadn't meant much before, and he realized they wouldn't mean anything now. He couldn't ask her to believe him. He had to show her. "I know," he replied quietly, his voice thick with sincerity. "I've been selfish, Sophia. I've been so focused on building this life for myself, but I see now that I've missed so much, especially with you. I don't want to miss any more. I will prove to you that I'm capable of being there for you, for our child." Sophia's eyes searched his, as if weighing his words. "I need to see it, Alex. I need to know you're not just saying this because it's convenient now. This is my reality. This is our reality. And I can't do it alone. So if you really want to be part of this life, show me." Her words hung in the air, sharp and final. There was no anger in her voice, just a quiet, resolute determination. Alex could feel the gravity of her challenge. This wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was about showing Sophia and himself that he was capable of stepping up. "I will," he whispered, his voice filled with resolve. "I will show you." For the first time in days, there was a spark of hope in his chest. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready to prove to Sophia and to himself that he could be the man she needed. In the weeks that followed, Alex's life began to change in ways he had never anticipated. He had always been focused on building his business empire, thinking that success in that area would fulfill him. But now, as he looked back, he realized how much he had neglected the people who truly mattered. He had sacrificed relationships, including the one with Sophia, for the sake of ambition. It wasn't easy for Alex to admit that he had allowed his work to consume him, but the realization was undeniable. He had been so obsessed with his success that he had missed the most important thing: human connection. And now, with Sophia pregnant with his child, the weight of his neglect was crushing him. He started making changes, small but significant. Every morning, he would leave his office earlier than usual to check in on Sophia to make sure she was okay. He became involved in her pregnancy, asking about doctor's appointments, offering to go with her, helping her with anything she needed. It was a stark contrast to the man he had been before, the cold, distant CEO who only cared about numbers and deals. Sophia watched Alex's transformation with a mixture of skepticism and hope. Part of her wanted to believe that he could change, that he could become the man she had always dreamed of. But another part of her was wary. The betrayal was still fresh in her mind. How could she trust someone who had hurt her so deeply? Someone who had crossed a line they could never uncross. There were moments when Alex's sincerity shone through, when he did something kind or thoughtful for her that reminded her of the man she had admired for so long. But there were also moments of doubt when his past behavior resurfaced, and she found herself pulling away, afraid to get too close. One evening, as they sat together in silence after a long day, Sophia finally spoke. "I don't know if I can do this." "Alex," she said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I don't know if I can trust you again. Everything you've said, everything you've promised, it sounds good. But I need more than that. I need to see it. I need to know you're really here, not just for the baby, but for me. For us." Alex felt the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy fog. He had known this moment would come, and it hurt more than he could have imagined. "I understand," he whispered. "I don't expect you to trust me right away. I've broken that trust, and it's going to take time. But I'm here. I'll prove it to you, Sophia. I'm not going anywhere. It wasn't easy." There were ups and downs, moments when Sophia would pull away, and moments when Alex would falter. But little by little, they began to rebuild. Slowly, Sophia started to see the changes in Alex, the sincerity in his actions, and the effort he was putting into making things right. And for the first time in a long time, there was hope. Not just for their future as parents, but for the possibility of rediscovering the connection they had once shared. Months had passed since Alex had vowed to change. He had spent every day proving his sincerity, showing Sophia that he was committed to being there for her and their child. His actions had spoken louder than words ever could, and slowly Sophia had begun to soften, though her heart still carried the scars of betrayal. Alex had learned that winning back Sophia's trust wasn't going to be easy. But he had also learned something more important. He wasn't doing this just for her. He was doing it for the family they had created together, for the future they could build. Every day he worked to prove that he wasn't the man who had once let ambition blind him. He was ready to be a father, a partner, and a man who could support Sophia through anything. One evening after a quiet dinner at home, Alex sat across from Sophia, his heart racing in his chest. He had been thinking about this moment for a while now, and he knew it was time. "Sophia," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent so much time thinking about everything, about how I've treated you and what I've put you through. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be the man you deserve. I want to be a father to our child, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your trust and love." Sophia's gaze softened, but she remained silent, watching him carefully. "I can't imagine my life without you." Alex continued, his voice unwavering. "I love you, Sophia, and I want to ask you, will you marry me? Will you give me a chance to show you that I am the man you need?" A heavy silence fell between them as Sophia processed his words. Her heart was torn. She wanted to believe him, wanted to give him the chance he so desperately sought, but there was still a part of her that held back. The scars of betrayal were not easily forgotten. "I don't know if I can fully forgive you yet." "Alex," Sophia said softly, her voice betraying her hesitation. "I've been hurt, and it's hard to let go of that. But for the sake of our child, I'm willing to try. I can't promise that everything will be perfect, but I'll give you a chance." Alex felt a rush of relief mixed with gratitude, but he also knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, and he would have to continue proving himself every day. "Thank you, Sophia," he whispered, his voice full of sincerity. I'll spend every day showing you that you made the right choice." They married in a small ceremony, surrounded by close family and friends, the promise of a fresh start hanging in the air. But Alex knew that this was just the first step. He wasn't just marrying Sophia. He was committing to a future with her, to rebuilding their foundation, and proving that he was worthy of the love they both shared. As they exchanged vows, Alex couldn't help but feel that, while this was a beginning, it was also a promise to never take her or their family for granted again. The years that followed were filled with new challenges and new beginnings. Alex and Sophia's love grew stronger, but both knew that healing the wounds of the past would take time. The scars of betrayal lingered, but they were learning to rebuild brick by brick with patience and understanding. Alex had changed. He was no longer the man who prioritized success over everything. He was now a father, a partner, someone who had learned the true meaning of responsibility. They faced each day with a renewed commitment to each other and their family, but they knew the journey ahead would never be easy. The past still cast its shadow, and there were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of what they had been through felt too heavy to bear. But they held on to the love that had brought them back together, knowing that it was enough to guide them forward. The final scene shows Alex and Sophia hand in hand, looking down at their child as they navigated the beautiful, chaotic journey of parenthood. They weren't perfect, but they were stronger together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while they faced it side by side, ready to embrace whatever came their way.